Thank you for tuning into The Voice of Adventure. Join me today as we explore Journey of the Chief, The Beginnings. Akatu sat at the ocean's edge. The waves crashed gently on the shore as the evening sun hit the water, turning the clouds to vibrant reds and yellows. A ways down the beach, fishermen were spreading out their nets, a sign of another day of fishing coming to an end. Here by the seaside was the only peaceful place for him. With all the preparation for the upcoming trial selection, the village felt overwhelming, so Akatu often came here to get away. The trial selection was all anybody could talk about since it was a chance for a new chief to be chosen. Whoever was chosen had to complete the 4 trials to show that they were worthy of becoming chief. Long ago it was believed that battles to the death were fought for the title of chief. So much blood was shed that to save the people, the 4 gods, Terandra, Ventos, Aquila, and Pyros stepped in and created the trials. A new chief would be chosen when the current chief and others decided it was time. At that time, lots were cast, and a child between the ages of 13 and 23 was chosen to complete the trials. They had 6 months to complete the trials, and if they succeeded, he or she would become the village chief. If they failed, a new candidate was selected. For the past 3 years, they have sent children out, but none returned. Amik was one of these children. Amik and Akatu were best friends who did everything together. They could always be found wandering the shores of the beach together. When Amik was chosen for the trials, Akatu was devastated. His best friend was chosen to become the next chief, but why then did he not come home? If the gods know the outcome, then why do they choose people who don't become the chief? Akatu wrestled with this question when Amik never returned. He became bitter and hated the gods because they took away his best friend. Akatu wasn't the only one hurting from the loss of the 6 candidates. The whole village felt the pain. In spite of that, the villagers still believed it was planned by the gods. Therefore, they did not stop celebrating the next candidate. The villagers prayed longer, worshipped harder, and sacrificed more offerings than ever before, believing this would bring the next candidate home safely. Akatu continued to stare out over the water, wishing this day would be over. The whole village thought the gods planned these selections, but the gods were nothing more than bogus stories that forced the villagers into one way of thinking. If we free ourselves from these fake gods and old traditions, we can focus on improving our lives, Akatu thought. But no matter how much he protested, no one would listen. The village's traditions ran deep, and mere words would not pull him out of it. To make matters worse, his parents tried to breed him for the trials. From a young age, he was forced to run, swim, climb, and work his muscles to the point of collapse. They kept pushing him to his limits in hope that he would be chosen and become chief. The last 3 years only made the training worse. They continuously told him that the gods had chosen him to lead the village, that it was his destiny. The gods had shown this in a dream to his parents. Akatu thought it was ridiculous. At least he was 23 and counting down the days until he was no longer a candidate for the trials. 2 more selections left at most, and he would be free. A voice came from down the beach interrupting his peace. Akatu looked and saw his younger brother Gazette walking down the beach shouting, "Akatu, the celebration is about to start." Gazette was only 7 years old, and he still saw the world with those eyes of innocence. To him, everything in the village was perfect. He was living the perfect life with his friends and family. Akatu ignored his brother's call, not wanting to leave his peaceful spot, although Gazette's shouting continued to ruin the peace. Gazette finally spotted Akatu and ran to him. "There you are, brother," Gazette said joyfully. "Come, or the celebration might start without us." "Maybe we can just stay here. They won't even notice if we aren't there," Akatu replied. "But Mother and Father are looking for you. They even have Koa and Erdik searching as well." Anger filled Akatu's body. He wanted nothing more to do with the celebration, yet his parents forced him to go every time. Since he was little, his parents forced their desires onto him. They said he was to be chief. The gods told them so. But Akatu believed they forced him to train for personal gain. They wanted the bragging rights and recognition that would come if he became the chief. Gazette could see the rage on Akatu's face. Unsure what to do, he pleaded. Please come, we are missing all the fun. Akatu looked at his brother and saw his big eyes begging him to go. After a long few seconds, he reluctantly replied, Fine, let's go before all the fun ends. Gazette jumped for joy as Akatu stood up. Seeing his brother so happy made Akatu forget about the trial selection for a second. Gazette was worried it would start without them. They ran down the beach and over the last hill before they saw the village in front of them. Simple wooden homes lined the dirt paths. The houses were small with just a single room for sleeping. They were built on 3-foot stilts to protect from the floodings that often occurred. It was believed that Aquella, the goddess of water, brought the floods as punishment because humans had tricked her into giving the secrets of sea navigation. Everyone was leaving their houses, heading towards the village center. Gazette tugged at Akatu's arm excitedly. Come on, it's starting soon. They continued running down the dirt paths, weaving in and out of people, bumping into a few as they went. They rounded a bend and headed to their house. Akatu's parents, Gora and Zaila, were waiting at the bottom of the ladder that led to their house. Gazette ran up to them smiling. I found him, he turned and pointed at Akatu. Can I go to the celebration now? He asked as if it was all he ever wanted. Gora, their father, squatted down, rubbing Gazette's head. Yes, go enjoy the celebration. Gazette sped off to the village center looking for his friends along the way. Gora stood back up. His smile disappeared, leaving a scowl in its place. He crossed his arms and said, Where have you been all this time? The celebration is about to start, and you were nowhere to be found. What does it matter? Akatu said. It's not like the village would notice if I was gone. Akatu, everyone would notice, Gora shouted. You know how important this is to the village. You mean how important this is to you, Akatu retorted, surprised at his own brazenness. The veins in his father's neck started popping. Zaila stepped in between them, putting a hand on Gora's chest. She spoke calmly, yet firm. Akatu, don't speak to your father that way. She paused, looking each of them in the eyes. She spoke tenderly, like only a mother could. This day is very important to us, but more than that, it is one of the last chances for you to become chief, just as the gods told us you would. Akatu did not believe this for a second. The gods weren't real, and neither was this dream of his parents. It is because you weren't chosen, father. This is really all about you, not me, Akatu thought. He could not say any of this to his father, though. Not only would the punishment be far greater than his satisfaction from saying it, but he truly did not want to hurt his father like that. Instead, he settled for glaring at his father. Gora glared back, veins even more pronounced, not breaking eye contact. Zaila could feel the air around them, heavy with emotion. Both men were only an inch from letting their rage loose. To Zalia's relief, a drum sounded in the distance, signaling the start of the celebration. She put a hand on Akatu's shoulder. The celebration is starting. It's not the time to be fighting with each other. She looked over at Gora sternly and continued. Let's go and enjoy ourselves. There's much for us to celebrate tonight. For a long minute, neither Gora nor Akatu moved, waiting for Zaila to leave so they could hash things out. But she did not leave. Until finally, Gora turned and started walking to the celebration. He was silent as his anger simmered, noticeable in the scrunched face and stomping footsteps. Zaila watched her husband as he walked away, and then turned to her son. Go get changed. I expect to see you at the celebration in a few minutes. Without waiting for a response, she walked after Gora, linking arms as she caught up to him. Akatu continued to stand there, seething. It wasn't until his parents turned the corner and were out of sight that he moved. The last thing Akatu wanted was to join them at the celebration, but what choice did he have? If he did not go, his parents would search for him again, but this time there would be serious consequences. And seeing the look of his father, Akatu was worried he might not make it out alive. Begrudgingly, he went inside, changed, and headed to the center of the village. When he arrived, he chose a spot against a wall as far from people as possible, wanting to be anywhere but here. A large open dirt field stretched out in front of him where the celebration was being held. At the opposite end, the chief's house stood, elevated higher than the houses around it, and beside it, 4 altars were set up for the gods. Lines of families were waiting for their chance to give their offerings. Torches encompassed the edges of the field, and 4 large bonfires were set up near the middle. Palm leaf mats alternated with the torches, full of every type of food the village had to offer. What a waste of food, Akatu thought as he grabbed a few skewers of meat. Around the bonfires, people were singing and dancing, telling stories through music and movements. In a few areas, kids were gathered, sitting around older men who were telling stories handed down for many generations. Akatu remembered being one of those children. Every celebration, the same stories were told. Stories about how the gods conquered the darkness at the beginning and created the world. About how they protect us. About how they made everything we see today. Just a bunch of gibberish to Akatu now, but the children sat there listening, amazed at these stories. As Akatu stood and watched, he saw his family walk up to the altars to give their offering. Thankfully, he arrived after they got to the altar, so he did not have to join them. He wished his parents could see how ridiculous the gods were, and how preposterous were their stories. The tale said that Aquella, the goddess of water, cried in the darkness before the world was formed, and the oceans came from her tears. Other stories told of the god of fire Pyros and his strength as he battled the darkness, forming the sun in the process. If you looked into any of the stories, they made no sense. How can you battle darkness? It is not a tangible thing. Thoughts of these stories and the ridiculousness of them flowed through his head, making his anger rise again. He wished he could show them the foolishness of believing in the gods and help them see a better world without them. But they never listened. They were unable to see any world without these fake gods. He waited against the wall, not engaging with anyone, wishing this would be over quickly. For too many hours he stood there watching everyone else enjoy themselves, eating their fill, playing games, laughing hysterically, and giving offerings to the gods. Soon the ceremony will start, and after it finishes, I can finally be free of this annoying celebration, Akatu thought. Just then, a horn sounded from the chief's hut. All conversations and stories stopped, and everyone turned to look at Chief Mirza. The chief looked like a Goliath of a man. He stood over 6.5 feet tall and had muscles bulging from under his tunic. His head was shaved to hide his graying hair. His build alone intimidated anyone aspiring to be the next chief. The whole village gathered around in excitement, ready for the selection to start. The candidates for the selection stood in straight rows in front of the chief's house. Akatu found a spot in the back of one of the lines, ready to leave once it was all over. All the candidates were wearing pure white clothes, as was the custom. You could tell that some of them were playing and dancing earlier from the sweat and dirt stains streaking the stark white of their tunics. The villagers formed a semicircle around the candidates, blocking any chance of Akatu sneaking away before the selection concluded. All eyes were on the chief. He looked out over the 50 or so candidates and smiled. Before we start the ceremony, I would like to take a minute to remember those who have not returned to us from the trials. Heads bowed and a quiet stillness filled the village. Silence encompassed them, except for the sound of a few mothers holding back their tears. The chief raised his head and lifted his arms to the clouds. May the gods bring their souls peace. The village followed his lead, lifting their head and hands in unison. May the gods bring their souls peace. Akatu refused and chose to keep his hands by his side. Oh, what a joyous day it is, Chief Mirza said, showing a huge grin across his face. We gather here again to send another young one on a great journey to become our future chief. And oh, do we need a new chief. This one's bones are barely working." The village erupted in laughter, and even Akatu couldn't help but chuckle. The chief was old, but by no means frail. After a few seconds, the chief silenced the laughter with a wave of his hand. He stood up straighter and started pacing on the stage. "As the stories say, these trials stopped a civil war from happening. Back before the trials, the chief of the time died before he could choose his successor. He had twin sons, and both could become great chiefs, but they both desired the title. The villagers took sides and the community split, half supporting one and half the other. With neither side backing down, weapons were sharpened, plans made, and a war was about to begin." Chief Burza paused for a bit, letting the thought of war fill their minds, even though they had all heard the story numerous times. He continued, "On the day of war, both sides met here in the middle of the village, weapons drawn, ready to attack. But before either side could move to strike, 4 beings descended from the heavens. It was the gods!" Chief Burza shouted this out, showing his joy for this part. "They came down and shown themselves. They cared for us and stepped in to stop us from destroying each other." Chief Burza stopped pacing, having reached the final part, and looked over the candidates. "They created these trials so that we would not go to war with each other again. And for proof of our worthiness, they created these marks that appear on the arms of those who pass the trials." Chief Burza turned his shoulder to the crowd, showing them the tattoo on his shoulder. It consisted of an outer ring, roughly 4 inches in diameter, set with a spiraling pattern, and a slightly smaller inner ring that was separated by curved lines into 4 quadrants. In the first quadrant was a symbol of twin peaks representing Teranja, the goddess of earth. The second contained the symbol of a cloud being blown in the wind, representing Ventos, the god of the air. The third depicted a crashing wave for Aquila, the goddess of water. The final quadrant had a symbol of flame for Pyros, the god of fire. Satisfied that everyone had the chance to admire the tattoo, he looked to the side and waved his wife up, who was carrying a large ceramic pot. Chief Burza turned back to face everyone. "Now comes the best part. In the pot are small plaques with all of your names on them." He motioned to all the young candidates who were standing in line. "Whosever name is chosen will get the honor of partaking in the trials to become the next chief." Chief Burza turned to his wife and shoved his hand in the pot, retrieving a plaque. Looking around, Akatu could see everyone waiting in excited expectation. Some were fidgeting, unable to remain still. Others were holding their hands in anticipation. And to his disappointment, his parents were praying. His mother was on her knees, her eyes closed, and was reciting something Akatu could not hear. His father looked up to the sky as if looking for a sign that the gods were hearing them. Akatu turned back towards the chief, ready for this to be over. The chief slowly turned the plaque around, drawing this moment out longer than Akatu thought necessary. "Here I have the name of the candidate who will travel across the lands, find the 4 temples, and prove they are worthy to become chief." Chief Burza paused again, building up anticipation even further. "And the person who will begin their journey to become the next chief is Akatu." Cheers and applause rang out from the village as Akatu stood there stunned, mouth open. He was in shock. Not once did he consider that he would be chosen for this ridiculous tradition. The cheers continued and even grew louder as he looked over at his parents in disbelief. He saw them jumping for joy and praising the gods for answering their prayers. Looking at them so excited made his blood boil. A couple of the other candidates tapped him on the shoulders, bringing his attention back to his fate. They motioned him to where the chief was and prodded him along. It was then that Akatu heard the chief say, Don't be shy. Come and join me here. Akatu slowly made his way next to the chief, disbelief and anger mingling in his mind. Chief Burza put his hand on Akatu's shoulder and continued. I know that tonight will be filled with celebration for you, but let's not forget your task given by the gods. You must go and find all 4 of the gods' temples. Speaking from experience, it is a tough journey. Chief Burza grabbed Akatu's shoulders and turned him. Looking straight into his eyes, the chief said, Trust in the gods, for they chose you. They will guide you to each of their temples. After finishing that declaration, Chief Burza turned towards the village and shouted, Let us celebrate the next chief candidate! Cheers erupted again as everyone left the semicircle, grabbing drinks and food. Music and song started again, louder than before. A large group of dancers stomped their feet and flung their arms in celebration and worship. The village was overflowing with excitement, as the villagers worshipped the god who brought forth another chief candidate. Akatu was led to his family, who were overjoyed. They showered him with praise, love, and hugs, all while saying that the gods always come through. Akatu's anger burned hotter. He did not even want to be chief or go on the stupid journey, but there was no refusing now. The whole village believed the gods would guide them. If he decided not to go on the journey, not only would it bring shame on his family, but he would also be ostracized by the whole village or potentially exiled. He had to go on the journey and find a way to survive. There was no other option. The rest of the night was a blur for Akatu. The whole village took turns congratulating him and praying for a safe journey. Countless people offered their advice for the trial, but since none of them had ever gone, Akatu ignored it. The celebration continued late into the night, but Akatu left early saying he had to prepare for his journey. The moonlight lit Akatu's path. The soft light made the empty houses look like part of a ghost town. He walked right past them and down the path towards the shore. He wanted to get away. He walked down the shore, occasionally looking back to make sure no one was following. The night was silent. The only sound was the crashing waves against the shore. Akatu walked for a while, aimlessly trotting through the sand. Eventually, he got tired of walking and sat down, gazing out at the ocean. The moon reflected over the calm waters. Akatu sat there thinking. He thought about how the village was stupid for worshipping the gods, how the idea of the gods is stupid, and how it was pure chance he was chosen and had nothing to do with the gods. After sitting in his anger for hours, he had no strength left but for despair. He fell on his back in the sand, looking up at the stars. Why me? Why do I have to go? Why couldn't anyone else's name have been pulled out? He laid there and started to weep. He wept at his misfortune for being chosen, at his parents for forcing this burden onto him, for his siblings he'll never see again. He wept until he fell asleep in the sand. As the sun rose and started warming Akatu, a hand gently touched his shoulder and shook him. Hey, wake up! A voice spoke right next to him. Akatu squinted as he opened his eyes, blinded by the light from the sun. He looked at this man, confused and tired from a long night. A look of concern was on the man's face. He continued, You were asleep on the beach. Akatu slowly sat up and stretched. Suddenly, memories of last night came flooding in. The selection, the celebration, him being chosen. It all came back in a flash. His eyes widened, realizing that he had never made it home last night. Akatu jumped up to his feet, thanked the man for waking him, and sprinted back to the village. He quickly made his way back to his house, where he found his mother beginning her day. His mother, Zalia, was surprised to see him. I thought you'd left for the trials before we woke up. He stared at her, too out of breath to say anything. I believe the chief is at the east side of the village waiting for you. Did you pack your satchel last night? Akatu shook his head. Thalia sighed and climbed up the ladder with Akatu. They quickly got together spare clothes, a few daggers, a machete, and some food, stuffing all of this into a satchel. Thalia gave the bag to Akatu and embraced him. She whispered, "Go and become the chief I know you can be." Before Akatu could respond, Thalia turned around and, struggling to hold back her tears, said, "You don't want to make the chief wait any longer." Akatu quickly left, not saying anything as he went. He ran out of the house, through the village, and off to the east. As he reached the end of the path, he saw Chief Burza standing there waiting. Akatu turned his run to a walk. Chief Burza turned to him, a hint of annoyance on his face. "I was wondering how long you would keep me waiting." "Sorry for the wait," Akatu responded. "I'm glad you made it before I had to come find you. The journey ahead will be very dangerous and in unfamiliar lands." Akatu nodded, ready to leave with minimal words. He thanked Chief Burza for seeing him off, but before he could take a step, Chief Burza put a hand on Akatu's shoulder, stopping him. "Now, before you go, I want to give you some advice since I passed the trials when I was young like you." Akatu did not want to hear any more about the gods, but he could not say no to the chief. "You already know the four gods: Terandra, the goddess of earth; Ventos, the god of air; Aquella, the goddess of water; and Pyros, the god of fire. The temples for each god are with their respective elements. Terandra's temple is in the mountain to the far east." He pointed off to the eastern horizon. "Hidden near the peak of a large snow-covered mountain is a cave that will lead you to her temple in the heart of the mountain. You will have to traverse the mountain and explore its maze of caves to find it. Past the mountain you will find a desert where the wind does not stop blowing. In the middle of the desert is where Ventos's temple is. The wind will make the sand feel sharp, and the sun heat feels unbearable, but at its center you will find an oasis where the temple lies. After you traverse the desert, you will find a great ocean. Aguela's temple is where the water falls beneath the water. You have to get a boat and sail where the currents take you. Be careful though, the sea is harsher than the desert. Lastly, days east of Aquela's temple you will find a burning island. Fires burst up from the mountain on this island, and the rivers run with burning water. Pyros' temple is in the middle of the fire." Akatu felt overwhelmed with all this information. It felt like this advice would lead him straight to his death instead of to the temples. Chief Burza could see how confused Akatu looked, so he leaned in, grabbed Akatu's shoulders, and looked straight into his eyes. "Don't worry about the specifics. The gods will lead you to their temples. Trust the gods." Akatu stepped back out of Chief Burza's reach, thanked him, and went on his way. He was tired of hearing about these gods who don't exist. "They're not real, I tell you, and I'm going to prove it." And with that thought, his journey began. Thank you for listening to Voice of Adventure. Make sure to keep up with the adventures by following the Voice of Adventure on Spotify. If you wish for extra adventuring content, follow me on Instagram at Josiah the Author. See you in the next story.